Hello and welcome to Cosmic Compass, the leading astrocartography podcast where I teach you all about relocation astrology and whatever else I want to talk about. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about timing your travels, timing where to be. This is one of my favorite topics in relation to locational astrology, where to be and when, right timing. I'm obsessed with two things: where to be, location, and predictive timing. And so this is where we blend time and place to get some really cool magical opportunities for your travels and where you want to be. Before we jump right into the timing, I want to just mention real quick that my relocation astrology course, my flagship signature program with dozens of hours of course material, if you've ever wanted to learn how to read birth charts, relocation charts, astro maps, and timing, which we're going to get into today, if you ever wanted to learn all of this and see all the examples, the tutorials, seeing how this works, you're going to love the relocation astrology course. And we're doing 2 live classes this coming Friday and Saturday, April 18th and 19th, 8 p.m. France time. So if you want to get all that information, I'm going to be doing these live classes for the relocation astrology. You can jump right in, get all that amazing content. I'll put it in the show notes down below. And yeah, so make sure you join by this weekend so that you can take part in the live classes and ask your questions. You can find all that information on my website at helenawoods.com/relocation-astrology, and you'll find all the information there. All right, let's jump right into the podcast episode. So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about cyclocartography, part 2 of timing your travels. If you remember from earlier in the season 1 of the podcast, I had a part 1 episode where I talked all about transits and timing where to be for your trips and using transits, the real-time planetary activity, as it hits your planets in your birth chart. It's also going to hit those planets on the astrocartography map as well. So if you haven't listened to that episode yet, part 1, I'll include the link down below to listen to that before we get into part 2. But this is part 2. And this gets a little bit more complicated because we're going to add in the amazing feature of cyclocartography. Now, if you don't know who Jim Lewis is not only famous for making astrocartography maps, putting the planets on angles on a map that you see visually, but he also created what's called cyclocartography. And cyclocartography is essentially utilizing the transits and the secondary progressed planets, because the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, they move really quickly. And so what Jim Lewis does is he uses the secondary progressions for the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, and then we look at the transits for the more slow-moving planets like Saturn, Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So what we're doing is we are progressing the faster-moving planets and we're transiting the slower-moving planets. And what we're doing is we're pulling up the map, the astrocartography map, the map software, and we're noting when points are hitting other points, or when these transiting or progressing lines on the map are hitting the permanent astrocartography lines that are always on the map. So as an example, let's say you have the moon setting line. The moon is on the descendant in Spain. And at that time, we are seeing a Venus progression going over that line. So think of that as Venus on moon. The Venus progressed line is hitting the moon astrocartography line that you always permanently have in that location. So think of it as like Venus on moon. Or let's say you have a Jupiter transit and Jupiter is going over your Mercury line. So transiting Jupiter, expansion, is transiting over your Mercury astrocartography line. So it's Jupiter on Mercury and bringing about those themes. So I go way in more depth on what each of these means in my course, the Relocation Astrology course. In Module 7, I go deep into all the meanings of what all this means. But essentially, that's how it works. But essentially, that's how it works. It's planet on planet, line on line. And so really what this is showing is just when an aspect happens. So when there's a hard aspect, in the progressions or the transits to those planets. So when there's an opposition, when there's a conjunction, and when there's a square, those are the hard aspects, the conjunctions, the oppositions, and the squares. Well, technically conjunction isn't like a hard aspect. It's actually more a neutral aspect because it's just present with it. It's with it. But basically conjunctions, oppositions, and squares. When you see those lines moving on your map online and I use SolarFire for my software to see this. And by the way, if you don't have SolarFire, but you want to get that software, you can always use my code Woods15 and get 15% off that software. That is for PC users. If you have a Mac, I recommend Astro Gold. And you can use my code Helena15 for 15% off Astro Gold as well. I got discount codes for both softwares because both of them I do use. I have a Mac and a PC laptop. I use SolarFire a lot for my client work, but I'm starting to get more focused on Astro Gold and just doing Astro Gold, except when I'm looking at cyclocartography. When I'm looking at cyclocartography, I then use SolarFire. So use those codes if you want to get a software. If you end up wanting to invest and do this on your own time, it'll save you a pretty penny, those discount codes, when you go to get the software. So I hope that helps. But what we're looking at is when there are aspects being made with timing to the lines on the map. It's essentially showing where two planets are making contact with one another, when they're in a relationship with one another. And also, I like to think of the timing as when we see these transits and progressions moving on the map to these lines, it kind of awakens, or it makes these astrocartography lines kind of alive. It opens up a story. It brings about a theme or a topic in your life, something that's happening to you in that location in the world. It's also showing a chapter, an unfolding, and an evolving aspect of you that's coming out during that time when you're on your line. Now, I'm going to give you some examples in this episode showing you how this works. But so just remember, when we're talking about astrocartography and cyclocartography, the timing on your map, we're not really looking at like points. We're looking at when two lines are coming together, when there's a line on top of another line, when there's two sets of planetary lines, either natal and transit or natal and progressed planet, when they're making contact. That's cyclocartography. And so the best way to do this in a practical sense is to narrow down the places that you are planning to travel to or relocate to, and then look at the cyclocartography for those places. You will get easily overwhelmed if you're looking at the entire world and pulling up the cyclocartography for all of your lines. Sometimes I have clients that ask me this in an introduction call, and I get so overwhelmed because, well, first off, I don't do timing in my first introductory calls, but second, that is like, it's so hard to do. It's so impossible. I don't say it's impossible because as a Jupiter on the ascendant person, I don't believe anything's impossible, but it is really hard and you'll get very overwhelmed. Instead, I find narrowing it down to 3 locations on the map that you're considering going to, and then pulling up the timing and seeing which place is best for that current time in your life. If you're planning to go on a summer trip and you want to plan your trip for that summer, I would look at the cyclocartography for that summer in 3 locations. Think of cyclocartography as an overlay. So your astrocartography map, it's permanent, it's static, it will never change. It will always be that fixed map. That's your map. However, think of the cyclocartography, the timing, as an overlay, as a second layer on top of your permanent astrocartography map. Now there is no feature on SolarFire that I'm aware of. If there's a software out there that has this feature, I would love to see it. Please send me an email at helena@helenawoods.com and I would love to look into it. But there is no feature where it's literally like you're putting 2 maps on top of each other. You just have to remember where your astrocartography lines are in the world, and then when you pull up the subsidiary chart feature on the map using SolarFire or whatever software you're using, you pull up the subsidiary chart timing feature on the map, Your astrocartography lines will go away and disappear, but replaced there will be the transits and the progressions, the transits of the outer slow-moving planets and the progressed inner planets. So that's what you're seeing when you pull up like the software I use, SolarFire. And so what this is doing is this is showing us the places in the world that are being highlighted, that are being awakened, alive. Now, if you don't have SolarFire, it's okay. You can use this feature on like a chart wheel. So what you'll want to do is pull up a bi wheel with the natal chart or the relocated chart in the middle in the inner wheel. And then on the outer wheel, you're just going to add either the transits or the progressions. So you can also do 3 charts, but I get really overwhelmed by 3 charts personally. So I focus on first the transits to the chart and then the progressions to the chart, the secondary progressions to the chart. But then finally I look at the secondary progressed planets to the chart. And I'll just note when there are hard aspects to those planets that I'm looking at. So let's say, for instance, I want to go for Christmas to Thailand and I see I have a Venus line there. I'm going to note, do I have any progressed planets aspecting that natal Venus in the chart? Is Venus being progressed? Is Venus having a square by progression by the moon? The moon will be aspecting the Venus by progression, right? I'm going to note that if I'm seeing that in the chart on the bi wheel, right? If I see that Jupiter is transiting my moon, I might want to go to that moon line when Jupiter is exactly over my moon in the chart transit-wise. So you see how I'm doing this? The map is showing the same thing as the chart. They're just different ways of looking at it. Now, personally, I like seeing it on the map. It's kind of fun to pull up the cyclocartography feature on SolarFire and see it on the map, the lines moving and hitting the lines. So I personally like to use that when I'm doing my client readings. But if you don't have SolarFire, you can also do this by just pulling up a bi wheel and noting when there are hard aspects, squares, oppositions, conjunctions to those planets that you're considering going to. So let's say you want to go to your moon line, you look to your moon. What's happening with your moon during that timing? Let's say you want to go to a sun line, look to the timing of your sun. Are there any hard aspects being made to the sun in your birth chart, either by transit or progression? Square, opposition, conjunction. So I hope that kind of gives it a nice overview of what you're really looking at. And again, you can use it on the map, you can use it on the chart, you can do it both ways. They both work. They're both showing the same thing. I just personally, as a very visual person, love seeing the maps. You know, I'm obsessed with maps and locations and geography. I like using it on the maps on SolarFire, but use what you like. Hopefully, as I'm recording this, AstroGold will update their software to allow cyclocartography to AstroGold. I know a lot of my students are asking them to add that feature to AstroGold, and you know, they've been listening. They added the parents last summer. They added a relocated chart feature, which is really cool to use alongside the maps on AstroGold. So they are listening and they are making those adjustments. So if you have AstroGold, which I personally love AstroGold, it's like my favorite software that I use 90% of the time, 80% of the time. And personally, I use AstroGold the most on my Mac. I use it like 80% of my time. And it's my favorite software, but unfortunately, there's still some things they don't have, like cyclocartography. But if you reach out to them and send them an email, they might make that update. So definitely send them an email if you have AstroGold and you want to use cyclocartography on the maps, but it's not available yet. Even though timing is transitory, right? Like these lines that we see on the map, the secondary progressed sun to your Mars line in the world, that's a temporary transitory thing. It is really powerful. And so I want to go through some examples and also share with you how I timed my own travels this year, and how I did this using cyclocartography and transits. And you know, when we're talking about these secondary progressed planets, right, like the sun progression, that's a 2-year cycle. So if you were living, let's say, on your Mars line, right, you're living close to your Mars astrocartography line, and the sun is progressing by a hard aspect to your Mars. So when you're looking at the map, the sun is on your Mars line. Or if you're looking at a chart, the progressed sun is making an opposition, a square to that line that you're on, your Mars in your chart, right? Or for example, let's say you're looking at the chart and the sun is making a conjunction to your Mars by progression, or it's making a square, for instance. When that's happening, what you're getting is a 2-year story, a 2-year cycle, a topic, a theme that's happening. Moon progressions, they're shorter, they're 8 months long, so these are much shorter time frames. Jupiter transits can be like 4 months, they're very, very quick. But Jupiter, however, and Saturn, right, they will retrograde. They will retrograde and go back. And so Jupiter can be in your area for quite a long time, depending on where it's situated, how close it is to that aspect for that planet. And so when we're thinking about what this all means, we want to go back to what the planet represents. So like the sun represents creativity, self-expression, willpower, what you want out of life, what you're hoping to become in this life, what you aspire to be in this life. So when you see the sun progressing over a planetary line on your map, these are going to be, 2-year themes involving exploring who you are, your sense of self-expression, maybe feeling a bit more alive, feeling lit up, illuminated. For instance, when the progressed sun is, for example, when I was living on my Venus line, the sun was progressing toward my Venus line, and it was all about like exploring my sense of style and my fashion and what did I find beautiful? What do I like? What colors am I drawn to? And I remember when I was living on that Venus line directly in Strasbourg, I was really into filmmaking and photography and learning about editing on Photoshop and Lightroom and playing with different color palettes. I remember I used to go to the library all the time at the University of Strasbourg. It's like Hogwarts. It's such a cool, beautiful old university with like this beautiful library and stacks of books. I used to spend all my time in there because my husband was a teacher and so he had a pass. So I used to go in the library all the time. And I remember I went to the library where they have all the art history textbooks. And I used to spend so much time in the art history library reading books and learning about color palettes and Renoir. And I learned like what colors am I drawn to? What colors always keep coming up for me? What style of strokes do I really like? And that really influenced me and my photography and filmmaking work, which I did for years when that sun was going over that Venus line. Those years that I was living on that Venus line, it was all about like that story, that chunk of time in my life was all about creating beautiful, artistic, slow living films that I put on YouTube and like making beauty and showcasing beauty. And that was like a whole era of my life. I don't like doing that at all anymore. I'm like so bored by it. I'm much more interested in talking and writing now, like much more verbal things than I am artistic, creative filmmaking like I was back then when I was living directly on my Venus line with the sun progression. But, it was a really fun 2 years of my life that was just really, really fun to explore. And so this is why you do want to look at your timing because it's showing you these themes that are happening in your life when you're living on lines. So here's a little bit of I'll give you some examples too of how I timed my travels. So last year, I was in a Jupiter opposition. So transiting Jupiter was in Taurus, and it was opposing my natal Jupiter, which is in Scorpio. And so that's a hard aspect, an opposition. And I find that the most intense aspects are definitely more conjunctions and oppositions. Squares are obviously moments of tension, breakthrough moments, pressure, but pressure that can be kind of alchemized and utilized to help you get into your potential and step into your life's work and all that. So I don't want to say squares are a bad thing. They just bring more tension and more friction and can provide pressure and also like a breakthrough moment in your life. But oppositions and conjunctions are definitely more intense, especially oppositions, because oppositions are like a direct confrontation, a direct duel, a fighting match between two planets, but they awaken those astrocartography lines, like I mentioned. So as an example, during that time, I was in my Jupiter opposition. Jupiter, transiting Jupiter, was opposing my natal Jupiter. And when that was happening, I wanted to take full advantage of the timing. So I looked at my cyclocartography map on Solar Maps, Solar Fire, and I noted that because that opposition was happening, the Jupiter transiting line on the map was moving over all of my Jupiter lines in the world. And so what did I do? I planned all of my trips to go to my Jupiter lines. And this was just a fun experiment. I'm always investing my money into travel because I want to learn this. I want to live this. I don't want to just read books and I don't want to just do charts and like readings. Like I want to actually experience this for myself and see what happens when I go to these places. And I like to document it all. And so when I went to my Jupiter line, every time I would go to my Jupiter lines last year, and I went to one in California, I went to one in Estonia and Finland, and then I went to one in Japan. And every time I went to these Jupiter lines, when Jupiter was in a very close degree aspect to that opposition, when it was, or in other words, when Jupiter was going right over my Jupiter line on the map, I noticed that there was just a lot of opportunities coming my way, like huge YouTubers and podcasters, and people would reach out to me. I was getting featured in, big profile pieces online. Publicity was happening for me. Just more opportunities, like it was almost like there was just this more sense of ease and also optimism. Like I was feeling really good on those Jupiter lines when Jupiter was making that hard aspect, that it kind of, that optimism and that feeling of like anything is possible was so strongly felt when I went to those lines. And also the opportunities just kept flooding into my life when I was on my Jupiter lines during Jupiter oppositions. Now, I should always mention that Jupiter expands things. So if you're going through a rough time and you're going to your Jupiter line and you're in your Jupiter opposition and you've got a lot of hard transits, it can make things bigger than big or just feel a little bit overwhelming. Overwhelming is definitely something that Jupiter can bring. An energy that's overwhelming, too much of something. And I don't ever like to say that there's too much of anything. Again, I have Jupiter on the ascendant, so I am already overwhelming in general. But like, it does bring a lot of something, right? Jupiter brings a lot of something. So you always have to remember that with Jupiter is it expands whatever it touches and it makes something bigger than big. And so for me, in my case, it was a really fun year of going to my Jupiter lines. And man, if I could relive last year and the energy of being on those Jupiter lines, like, wow, that was magical. I created my Trust Your Timeline course. That energy is just so infused in that course. It's just, there's this magic that I was feeling and going through at that time in my life. And it was special. I'm so glad I took so many photos and videos and I recorded so much YouTube content when I was during that time, because it's kind of fun to have that recorded and documented so you can kind of be in that energy again. And then also this year, you might be wondering, what have I been doing this year since Jupiter entered Gemini last late spring into June, right? Last year in 2024. When Jupiter entered Gemini, Jupiter transited over my Mercury. It's been just kind of sitting on my Mercury for a while. And also right now it's inching its way closer to my Venus. So I definitely want to be on my Venus line when Jupiter is on my Venus this year. And I live close to my Venus line, so obviously I'm gonna be getting that. So it's lucky that I live here, right, on close to my Venus line. I'm not living directly on my Venus line like I used to, but I'm still very close, that when Jupiter starts hitting that area, it might be a fun time to go to Switzerland, spend some time in Italy, go down to the Alsace region of France while Jupiter is hitting my Venus, or the Jupiter line is hitting my Venus line. Or if you're looking at it on the chart, Jupiter is conjunct my Venus, transiting, right? So I definitely want to go to my Venus line while that Jupiter transit is hitting that. But I think for me, what I've been chasing this year is my sun line, because Uranus, the outer planet, slow moving, moves 7 to 8 years in a sign. It has been transiting over my sun for quite a while. It's just been kind of going back and forth over it. I like to describe this as entering my villain era, or just entering greater authenticity in my life, letting go of people pleasing, letting go of who I used to be as a kid, as a child, and really stepping into who I am and my personal power, and letting go of what people care, what they think about me, just like not giving an F anymore. And that's been it's also just been an extremely rebellious time in my life, and I'm honestly starting to get a little sick of it. There's just always this natural rebellion, and if people are mean, I just kind of want to piss them off a little bit more. That kind of just like childlike rebellion has definitely been seeping into my Uranus transiting over my sun, but it's also been just so eye-opening, and just realizing what I want to do with my life, who I am, what I'm available for. This is my life. This is how it gets to be. I'm done. Like, that's just that energy of empowerment. And it's been very exciting. Very groundbreaking, original, like stepping into my uniqueness in a greater way. To think of this in the astrocartography context of traveling, I've been going to all my sun lines. So I went to Dubai recently, and I went to my sun line. That was a doozy because, again, a lot was shown about my body and my health and my relationship to, how do I move my body? How do I take care of myself? Do I have energetic boundaries in my life so that energetically I'm not seeping all of my energy out and losing that? And then it affects my body and my health and how I approach my physical wellness, right? That was a huge topic that came up when I went to my sun ascendant, the sun rising line, the sun line that has to do with your body. When I was going over there in Dubai, that story came up big time for me. And also, sun lines I've been really trying to prioritize going to, and that's why I'm going to Sydney end of this week, because I want to catch this transit while I can. I'm not going to get this transit again in my lifetime. This is it. And so Uranus going directly on my sun by degree. My sun's at 26 degrees Taurus, and so that Uranus hitting the sun in the transit, going to my sun line to experience that is the goal and has been the goal for this year, because I'm getting such a cool, slow moving outer planet, Uranus, exciting, rebellious, revolutionary, authentic, unsettling, and chaotic mess that is Uranus hitting my sun. I'm like, let's do it. Let's go. I want to experience this. I want to feel this. I want to feel what this is like. And so I'm spending all my money to go to Australia. Very expensive trip, but I know it's going to be so worth it because I'm going to have tons of stories to tell. I have no idea what's going to happen. Again, when I went to Dubai, I was like, I think it might be something like this. And then it ended up being different, but similar topics, but in a different way. So it's always fascinating to go to these places in the world when you have these progressed planets or transiting planets hitting these lines you have on the map. It's just so cool. And so the ones that I would especially look out for, let's say you're getting ready to plan some trips, I would especially look at your moon progressions. So that quickly moving the progressed moon, right? Spends about 8 months over an area wherever you have that astrocartography line. So if you have your Venus in Aquarius, and you note that your secondary progressed moon is in Aquarius going over your Venus, I would go to your Venus line while you're getting that timing, right? Venus progressions are lovely. If you have a Venus progression going over a planet, right over your planet, I would go to that planetary line. So if Venus is progressing over your moon, I would go to your moon line as an example. And Jupiter transits. Obviously, Jupiter is faster, right? It takes 12 years to move through all the signs of the zodiac, all the 12 houses, right? So when you notice that Jupiter is either right on your planet, conjunct your planet transiting, or making one of those hard aspects, opposition or square, definitely check out those Jupiter. Definitely check out that line on your astrocartography map where Jupiter is hitting. And then finally, I wanted to share just some quick tips on timing your travels. I have noticed in the transiting chart, the sun transiting the 9th is so big for long distance travel. Like sun transiting the 9th. So like as an example, every time it's Cancer season, I have Cancer in the 9th house, I'm always going somewhere overseas or going to a different country when it's Cancer season. So sun transiting my 9th house of the long journey, long distance travel, foreign countries. Same with the sun transiting my 3rd house. It's a lot of road trips, a lot of communication projects, but often when it's Capricorn season, Capricorn being in my 3rd house, there's a lot of themes around travel as well. So Cancer and Capricorn season, for instance, is really big for me when I'm traveling. So look at the sun transits because the sun is shining a light and illuminating that area of your life. So if it's going over a travel house like the 3rd or the 9th houses, those are going to be big. Same with the 12th house. The 12th house is, solitude and being away from things, kind of, I won't say escapism, but can be like leaving work, escaping something in your life and kind of going somewhere else and having some solitude for a while, being in a foreign land, being away, right? So if you see the sun transiting your 12th, can also bring that as well. And then of course look to Venus or Jupiter going through your 3rd or 9th houses, the travel houses. Venus in the 9th is really fun for travel. I love that. Jupiter in the 9th is such a huge year for international travels and going long distances. So you might find that when Jupiter is transiting your 9th, it's just a year of that. And honestly, Jupiter is about to enter Cancer in my 9th house of travel. I'm like, gosh, where else am I going to go? I feel like I've been everywhere in the world that I've wanted to go. There's really no other places I want to see except for maybe Rio, my Jupiter line in Rio, but I'm waiting for Jupiter to be in my 10th to go there because I want that Jupiter square. Again, looking at hard aspects, I'm waiting for Jupiter to square my natal Jupiter, which should be when Jupiter enters Leo, that will be like summer of 26 into the fall of 26. So when Jupiter enters that time period, I will then probably go to my Jupiter line in Rio to test that out. So yeah, I can't imagine what other places I'm going to be going. It might be I'm writing a book or getting a book published or something with Jupiter in my 9th. And transits that are a little bit harder for travel, I find Mars in the 9th to be difficult. And I tested this last year. I kept traveling last fall and winter to all these places when Mars was transiting my 9th. And travel just was not as easy. Like luggage problems, delays, canceled flights, problems with the flight, problems at the airport, like issues, like things just kept coming up for me when Mars was transiting my 9th. And so I'm always cautious with Mars transiting the 9th house of travel. Just little couple quick pointers. You might feel very motivated to travel though when Mars is transiting your 9th, and I definitely was, but just a lot of hiccups, a lot of delays, a lot of irritations and frustrations and problems I had when I was traveling with Mars going through the 9th. But overall, those are the transits to look out for. Venus, Jupiter in the 9th and 3rd, Sun in the 12th, Sun transiting the 9th and 3rd as well. And then, of course, looking at your cyclocartography, looking at the map and seeing what transiting and progressed planets are hitting what lines on your map. All right, that kind of recaps the timing part 2 episode on timing your travels using cyclocartography, and also some transits to look out for when you're looking at your natal chart and your relocated chart. If you have any questions, let me know. Send me a DM on Instagram at Ms. Helena Woods. You can also email me at helena@helenawoods.com. You can feel free to send me over your questions. And I'm thinking about doing maybe a Q&A episode on timing, travel, astrology. If you have any questions on your astrology, your timing, your life, your astrocartography, send me an email or a DM. And I'm thinking about putting together an episode where I answer all of your questions. So it'd be great to hear from you. And before we go, just know that Relocation Astrology is happening this weekend, Friday and Saturday. Check out the link in the description if you want to join, if you want to be part of it. And if you're already a part of it, like you enrolled in Relocation Astrology last year or 2 years ago, or maybe you're in the certification program, you already have access. I'm excited to see you this Friday and Saturday. I hope you have a wonderful, magical day and happy astro travels. I'll see you in the next one.